introduce yourself. I love this venue just because it seems so proper. Everybody's all mic'd up, I think. Yeah, I think, why don't we introduce ourselves first, what you do, what brought you here, what you're working on, what you're excited about, etc. Well, just go down the road and start with Alex.
Yeah, so my name's Alex. I'm a product designer, senior product designer at Prodigy Education. So we make games for kids that help them to learn and make. Oh, am I not mic'd up? Do I need to push a button? Test, test, test. Is that working?
Yeah, you just have to hold it a bit closer.
Hold it a bit closer. Okay, maybe I'll just maybe. Is that better? Can you hear me better now? Closer? There we go. Okay, we've unlocked it, figured it out. Hi, I'm Alex. Try that again. I'm a senior product designer at Prodigy. So we make games for kids. We make math and an English game for kids to help them to enjoy learning and to kind of motivate them to learn topics that might make them feel a little bit anxious and topics that they don't feel super comfortable with. So I've been a product designer for the last almost 6 years. I started at Top Hat, where I was in kind of higher education technology, and then kind of moved over into the early education space. And I really love working in this space. It's an exciting space, it's an innovative space, and being able to support students and their learning, it's a really exciting thing to do every day. Lots of fun, and you're working on a game, so what's better than that?
Hi everyone, does this one work? I'm gonna have to do that too? Okay, do that. Is that better? Okay, great. My name's Natalie. I'm one of the developers at Prodigy. I've been a developer since 2016, but before that I was actually working in education, mostly with children with disabilities. I was an assistant to speech and language pathologists, so big focus on language learning. And when I became a developer, I always wanted to do something that was related to helping children learn, so I kind of found a great spot at Prodigy.
Hi everyone, my name is Patty, and I'm currently a high school teacher with the Toronto District School Board. This is my 5th year teaching with the public board, and I actually started my career in 2020, right when the COVID erupted, so I'm quite familiar with a lot of EdTech platforms because that's what we were using a lot during the last couple years. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Hi everyone, my name is Rico. I am a former school principal, school evaluator. I mostly worked in international education, so I spent a lot of times visiting schools around the world, leading schools of my own. And recently I just came back to Toronto, and I had a few conversations for some of you. And I recently transitioned into the EdTech space, and right now I'm working at an all-in-one school information system that also integrates learning management system. That's kind of our core focus right now, which I'm sure I'll talk a bit more about, and I mainly focus on product there. So lovely to see all of you.
It seems like you figured out the mic situation.
I do my best, I do my best.
Well, something's working. So, I mean, before we actually delve into the conversation, I mean, EdTech is such a specific field in the world of technology. A lot of folks in EdTech have had previous experience in education, you know, like the three of you, essentially. And the reason why I'm up here as the moderator is also because I used to be a high school teacher for the TSB up until, I think, 2020 to 2021. So, curating this panel was something that I was very, very passionate about. So I'm just also curious about the audience who is here. Are there any folks in the audience who is a teacher, who has dabbled in education, or something along those lines? Hands up. Okay. So I mean, I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions. But as with the topic, you know, AI is kind of at the forefront. People are, I mean, one of my friends actually was supposed to be here today. She's a teacher friend of mine. And, you know, I think there's a lot of folks in education, in public education especially, where the risks of AI seem to be bigger than the benefits of AI. It's always risks versus benefits, which one's going to win over. And so I'm curious, this is a general question, this is for any of the panelists. And, you know, AI is something that is so integrated into like developer class, which is something that is very much like in everyday people's lives, but I think in education it's still kind of like a right? So how do you envision AI kind of transforming education, whether it be in a positive or negative, whatever, in the near future, and what do you find are the potential risks versus benefits?
So I think for me, what I see as maybe an area where AI could make a big impact is in personalized learning. So if we think about a classroom today, so let's say an early childhood classroom, it's usually around like 20 to 32 kids, or in higher ed classroom, it could be anywhere towards 500 students in a class. What that means is it makes it really difficult for teachers to give that one-on-one support to students and really provide them with the personal learning journey that they need to succeed. So in classrooms, oftentimes what happens is that students who are struggling continue to struggle, and the students who are excelling won't be challenged in the ways that they need to be challenged. So there's a real opportunity to leverage AI to provide teachers with the tools to create that personalized learning experience. So I'm thinking about tools like AI tutoring that students could then use to access and unblock themselves when they're outside of the classroom if their parent or teacher can't help them that day, or personalized learning plans that take into account where a student might be struggling and helps them to target areas that they can improve on. Even using AI to analyze how your class is doing and then quickly identify areas for early intervention with your class on subjects that they might be, or topics that they might be struggling with. So there's definitely a lot of benefit in there, but like Chris mentioned, there's also a lot of risk. So we know the accuracy of AI is dubious at the moment. We know that data and privacy are at risk. And we also know that there's also a risk of potentially dehumanizing the learning process. So when we are thinking about AI tools for education, we really need to be thinking about humanizing that process more, ensuring that students feel comfortable asking questions, and that they are also being challenged to think critically and to think more deeply. So we're not just giving them the answers, we're giving them opportunities to think more deeply about the content. So I think we really need to be intentional when we're thinking about those AI products that we use.
So I actually had this discussion with my coworkers today. Like Chris mentioned, I think there's a lot of fear in AI within education, and especially with senior teachers. So I was having this conversation with my colleagues today, and I said that I think AI is actually a really wonderful tool to use and implement in classrooms. And we had like a back and forth discussion, and I kind of equated to like 10, 15 years ago. I know it's not the same, but 10, 15 years ago, we were strongly discouraged from using like Wikipedia as our sources, but now I think it's really important that we were taught to properly use Wikipedia to identify the sources. And I said we have to teach students to properly use AI and not kind of just take it for face value. I do understand the risk of it because so I always think of it from a student perspective. I do see a lot of my students using AI, and despite thinking that they're very smart and clever, I think they forget that I'm a young teacher and I can really identify AI very well. And I know their writing, and I'm also a former French teacher, so Google Translate has been a thing in my education and my entire career. So I do see a lot of like students using AI as just like almost as Google, and they don't fact check it, and they kind of use it to plagiarize. So I think it's really important to, instead of saying, oh, you can't use it because this is a tool and it's not your work, I think it's important to say, okay, this is a tool that you can launch your research. Now, how can you make it better using your own words and using it as a supplementary help instead of your own like brain and plagiarizing off of it?
It's spot on what you said, especially about teaching students to embrace it rather than setting limitations. For me as an educator, it frustrates me a lot when we put boundaries for kids to say, you can't use this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't use your phones. Because the reality is that AI, whether teachers in schools and we like it or not, it's here to stay. It is going to change completely the way we teach, change the pedagogy of how teachers actually engage in the classroom. So, what you're telling me is like music to my ears. I'm like, I wish more teachers would say that.
But I guess to defend my teacher friends, I can't fault them for saying don't use it because like teaching is a really mentally laborious task, and asking us to now go back and research what are the benefits of AI and to properly use it, that is a lot to ask, especially when we're doing it on our own unpaid time. So what I think it is necessary is to implement paid PD sessions or any PD sessions to really properly educate teachers on what AI is, instead of saying, okay, this is a tool that students use to plagiarize, deal with it on your own.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for me too. Echoing the sentiments that Patty said. My sister-in-law is a university professor, and she said she is seeing a lot of her students, they're university students, they're adults, using AI in their papers and stuff like that, and not properly checking their references. So I think that's really interesting. Like, we're seeing these problems with people who are adults who have grown up using technology their whole life, and they're still not using it as a tool that they carefully fact check afterwards. And so it definitely needs to be a skill that we're teaching our students from a young age.
Yeah. I mean, I'm reminded of, if it's the matter of us not being able to fact check or anything, kind of think about these sources, and it might just be, we need to rethink about what learning means. How are people learning? How are students learning? How are we learning, right? How have we stopped learning because now we have all these sources to kind of depend on, and we don't have to use our brains anymore. Because there are some days I'm like at work and I'll just be saying, whatever, like Copilot, and I don't even know this, I don't even understand this, but it's like, okay, I'll get it done, right? So if I do it, then I'm sure the students will too. So it makes me think about how do we, and I remember Rico in our conversation before, you were talking about kind of a more holistic approach to integrating AI and AI as like a learning tool in education. Is there kind of maybe a way this might look like in practice for you?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience of AI in education right now, a lot of times I see we're using AI for things to reduce marking time for teachers, help teachers with lesson planning, help curriculum coordinators with structuring their curriculum to see what standards we're missing and whatnot. That's all great. These are all critical parts of the school. But for me, I feel like having a more holistic AI means giving it as much context as possible. Context is so critical to any school. So when I think of a holistic AI, it's the idea that they take in a student's attendance, a student's behavior, a student's medical record, a student's family relationship, whether they're divorced or whatnot. Taking all those data down. What classes are they missing? Oh, hey, by the way, you might not know this, but Johnny has been consistently late to period 3 class for math every Wednesday. What's going on in that time period? So identifying trends with the full influx of context that we can get, I feel like that's an important part to move in AI. Because a lot of what I see is very important, don't get me wrong. My teachers have loved using GBT, Copilot, whatever, to simplify marking, saving them time, saving them on planning and whatnot. For me, I think the big part is mental health. That's a big part, especially with working with teenagers. My area is more working with middle school and high school kids, and we know what mental health is like for them these days. If we can use a holistic AI that is more of a big picture and not just simply focusing on, I see it as a tip of the iceberg. I see assessments, lesson planning, of course, these are very tip of the iceberg, but I see there's much more to be used with AI, which is why I see it as a more holistic overview of the student development, student safety, and along those lines.
How I'm kind of curious, after what Rico described, like, and being someone who actually works in the system, do you find that there are like certain limitations for you to be able to integrate these kind of methods into your classroom? Things like that.
Like limitations with implementing like tech or
Well, like what Rico just mentioned about, like a kind of a holistic approach, understanding the, like a student's mental health, like the full picture of it. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I think there are definitely like limitations of like understanding the holistic approach of it, and I do think the usage of like tech can like really streamline a lot of process, but I do think the limitation just comes from lack of time and having a lot of students to manage. So
Yeah, I know, and maybe we can chat with either of you if you have any input about how maybe AI is used in like product design, or like how we see it done in your work at Prodigy.
Yeah, sure. So not so much at Prodigy. We haven't really delved too much into AI there. But in my previous life at Top Hat, we were doing quite a few experiments with AI and how it could potentially be used in the classroom. So one of them was an AI tutor, and we actually partnered with a learning scientist, which was a really interesting experience because he helped us to really understand the science behind learning, the way that teachers think about learning, the way that students think about their own learning, so the pedagogy and the metacognition. And so when we were working on the prompt engineering for this AI tutor, it wasn't just, okay, how can we quickly unblock students by giving them the answer when they're unsure and they're reading through content, they don't know what something means. How can we go a step further and not just give them the answer, but ask them maybe a deeper question, ask them to give us an example, ask them to put the question into a different context, or help them to reframe or reshape what they're asking, so that we're not just pushing them towards the answer, we're helping them get there themselves and helping them learn a little bit deeper. So that was a really interesting way that we tried to kind of like incorporate AI while also thinking about how that application might work in the classroom.
So I'm also curious, I know when we were chatting before, we were talking about and your interest from working in early childhood and all that before, and we were talking about the concerns about learning gaps that were caused by COVID, especially in developing children's foundational skills like reading comprehension and whatnot. So how do you find that the EdTech products right now are addressing kind of these challenges for children?
Yeah, so maybe just to give a little bit of context on the learning gap, I'm sure if anybody here has kids, they really know what that experience was like when school shut down and suddenly parents were teachers and had that responsibility on them to kind of help their students to learn. What that resulted in, though, is when kids went back into the classroom, no two kids really had the same learning experience, and they were also behind in learning some of those behavioral, emotional, and social skills that they need to really succeed in the classroom. So things as simple as knowing that I need to raise my hand before I ask a question, or knowing that I can't just get up and run around the room when my teacher is talking or interrupting other kids. So what happened there was not only were teachers struggling to get students up to grade level, but they were also dealing with teaching these kind of basic skills to their students on how to have a productive experience in the classroom. So I think the things that we're thinking about at Prodigy in ways that we can help to alleviate that challenge for teachers is, number one, how can we help teachers kind of extend beyond their own physical boundaries? And I think we can do that by creating personalized paths to learning. So if I think about a teacher who is dealing with this COVID learning gap and maybe also has a split class, because that's really common right now, is you maybe have ones and twos in the same classroom. So you can imagine your lowest achieving student and your highest achieving student could be miles miles and miles apart. And as a teacher, how do I meet each one of their individual needs? Well, I'm likely going to have to kind of break my time up and maybe teach in smaller groups. So products like Prodigy give the teacher the ability to maybe take a small group away and teach a topic, while another group is working independently in Prodigy, and while they're doing that, they're taking a placement test in Prodigy that places them at a grade level, so above, below, or at grade level, and then they're served content that depends on how they scored. And so they're not ever getting content that's too challenging or content that's not challenging enough. They're being met where they're at. So the teacher feels confident then that their students are on task, on topic, working on curriculum aligned content, while they're able to still continue teaching to a smaller group, and then they can switch it up. And it just means that you're like extending the resources of that teacher. And I think that that's when EdTech really shines, is when it's not trying to take over the classroom time or take over the classroom, but be a resource and a tool and a teacher's toolkit, and like expand their ability to kind of work with kids one-on-one.
Yeah, for sure. And I was just, while you were talking about that, I was thinking about, a couple of things, but one of them is, how do you ensure, I guess, in our current world of kind of overstimulation, device addiction, myself included, I'm always scrolling on Instagram Reels, and how do we strike a balance using EdTech for student engagement? And ensure that we don't ensure that we don't overstimulate kids and it becomes kind of an addiction where it no longer becomes a tool for learning, but something that is harmful towards learning. And this is open for anyone.
Yeah, we see a lot of the teachers who use Prodigy use it as a reward. So we find that's a really helpful way to kind of monitor the screen time. Sometimes they have a Friday afternoon fun time and they'll let them choose from a number of educational tools they can use, and one of them is Prodigy, or using it, for when they've completed a test or something like that. So giving screen time as a reward, I think, is a way that we can kind of monitor that a little bit.
Yeah, so I guess making sure that it's that's not something that they can, that will be part of their. It's like a fun thing for them to do. Yeah. Have you used any sort of like a reward system, Patty, in your?
So for myself, I haven't used Prodigy myself because I do teach high school, but I use Duolingo with my students, especially when I used to teach beginner level French. So if they were done their test early, but other students were writing tests and they needed to be quiet, I would allow them to use Duolingo to get points. Or if they're done a task before other students, I would allow them to use Duolingo. But the reality is, yes, these are all great, and I think it's really great that students are given more opportunity to expand their learning. But with the reality of education, schools have really changed over the past 10, 15 years. It is very hard to get students to work on any assignment, whether it's traditional paper, pencil, or with EdTech. And the concept of working independently has vanished over the past couple of years. I have a group of very fantastic university level students, and they, despite their academic, they're very academic inclined, but they are still not able to work independently. So I think I'm still trying to find a balance on using it as a reward system and using these really cool platforms for them, but also how can I encourage them to work more independently?
Do you find that that's because of lack of focus, or what do you think the issue is?
I really do think it's lack of focus, and I do think a lot of students are addicted to a lot of stimulation. So because of that, they're not able to focus and stay on one task.
I see. Rico, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's attention span is, especially post-COVID, just went completely downhill. We had basically 2.5 years or 3 years where students weren't learning, especially in the middle school and high school. That's the reality. I had kids come back to me after COVID, say, "Oh, Mr. Chow, we were just playing like Valorant, like while you were talking, right?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I kind of knew that, yeah." So, we had this big chunk of time where parents were working at home. Parents do not have the time to sit with these kids, to focus, to help them learn and whatnot. So we had all this time where they didn't actually grasp the skill in those really important formative years. How do I learn? How do I self-manage? How do I organize myself? How do I communicate? How do I socialize with my peers? How do I collaborate with them? So all these pivotal study skills that they've just completely lost in the span of 3 years, and suddenly we expect them to suddenly be able to be fit in the classroom and suddenly learn. Like it was a really hard transition I've noticed for myself and my staff returning. Now in terms of EdTech, I really feel that there has to be, EdTech apps, what I see with students, it has to be meaningful and purposeful. It really has to be meaningful and purposeful. So what does that look like? For me personally, there has to be a big marriage between educators, devs, and designers. Whether that's a residency from both ends where devs are spending 2 days a week shadowing teachers. How do classrooms look like? How do classrooms work? Product designers shadowing teachers, shadowing administrators. What does your day-to-day look like? What tools are you using right now to manage it? Because I think only with that kind of marriage will we be able to create apps that are more balanced in terms of engagement and screen time. Because the other thing that I really see is we want students to use our applications. We want them to use the apps that they need for school. But most of the time they're not. They're scrolling TikTok. So this is something I really strongly believe in. UI and UX is so important. A kid going on TikTok, suddenly flipping on their school management system, they're taken back onto a time machine and they're traveling back 20 years and the UI is old as heck. They're not going to want to use that. Why are they using Duolingo? It looks great. There's a gamification. The UI is amazing. There's a really nice progress to it. So having these design philosophies to really marry, I think, what students are using on their phone, the UI and UX that's familiar there, translating that to school where it's meaningful to them. It's familiar. And this also eases the pain of parents because I struggle, even as an administrator, to navigate all the different platforms and UIs and UXs, really poor interfaces with education. And yeah, I think that's kind of what I have.
And that's kind of the problem that you're trying to solve with your product.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about
Yeah. So in the education space, K-12 specifically, every school has something called the student information system. This is your backbone of your school. It houses all your student data, their parent relationships, all the most sensitive and most private data, they're housed there. Report cards, grades, everything's there. But then you also have your learning management system, something you might be familiar with, Canvas, Blackboard. So these are more the learning management systems where teachers and students interact with, but that's specifically for a learning side. What I have found and what I've been so frustrated as an educator is I have not been able to find one platform that houses everything in one with one login. There's always, I remember I had to upkeep 4 different subscriptions for my previous school, and it cost me 100,000 euros a year to maintain 4 different systems that did not, okay, you can integrate it through APIs, but they weren't seamlessly integrated. I still had to click a sync button to port my grades over to my student information system so my parents at home can see it. Oh, but wait, you need to access the newsletter. Here's the other login for that. Oh, during COVID, we're supposed to have parent-teacher conferences. Here's another app to log in. And in my head, I've been struggling to manage and organize this, and I'm trying to think, how do you drive school change? How do you drive school improvement? And it's consistency. You don't drive school improvement and student learning by having 10 different systems that don't talk to each other. So for me, what I'm working on right now with my team is really creating a truly all-in-one system That's one login, modern UI and UX. But the key philosophy is this, as I said, the design has to be modern, clean, and seamless. It's a very easy front end to interact with, but on the back end, it's very complex because the inherent nature of schools is complex. Schools are one of the most complex industries there are. Each student is unique. Each student's family is unique. Each teacher is unique. So it's very complicated. But when we start with a very central point of data, which is the student information system, the central point of truth, you can layer your learning management system. You can layer your admissions. You can layer your safeguarding and mental health onto it very easily. But you can't do it the other way around. You can't start with your learning management system and go back, because the learning management system is not the central point of truth. The central point of truth for any school is a student information system. So that's been a struggle of mine, and that's been a sentiment that I have found in my experience as a principal, in my experience evaluating schools around the world, talking with principals around the world. It's frustrating, it's dated, why isn't there a solution? So this is something I'm trying to solve right now.
Well, I'm very excited, and I hope you can solve the problem. Maybe if you do, I'll go back to teaching.
I'll be first to let you know.
Actually, so I want to go back to what Rico said about the marriage of all the different developers coming together. And I think now we have a very unique experience as having been an educator before, having worked with students, and now you work as an engineer. So maybe tell us a little bit about that process and how you see your previous work in education translates into the work that you do now, and how you I guess your vision and your idea about EdTech and the future of education.
Yeah, so I think for me, accessibility is really always top of mind because I do have the experience of working with children with disabilities. So that's something that a lot of developers consider very boring and kind of a chore. But for me, it's something that I think is it's really important, and it's important that we are, testing that stuff properly and making sure that our product is actually accessible and inclusive for everybody who needs to use it. At Prodigy, we also have a bit of a unique situation. There are a lot of former educators that we work with. We do have a former teacher who kind of shares with us the teacher's perspective. She used Prodigy in the classroom for many years. We have a former principal who runs a lot of studies on the product and, proves that it is working the way we want it to be, and improving children's scores on certain tests and stuff like that. So I think it is a bit of a unique product in the sense that we do really involve a lot of educators, and I think that the company itself really prioritizes having that perspective included from all the way along the road. Some of the marketers even have experience in the education space, and designers, and yeah, it's great.
Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you summed it up really well. And maybe I also love the point that you made about accessibility, because I think another unique thing there as well, that we may not recognize just from user testing alone, but accessibility doesn't always just benefit users who have accessibility needs. We also are in this unique space of early childhood education, and one of the issues that we know of is that a lot of little kids can't read yet. So for them to be able to understand the content within our program, they need tools like text-to-speech so that they can actually consume that content, or even just having larger text sizes, making sure that we're using fonts that are accessible for users with dyslexia, having large enough text for little kids who are just learning how to read and who can't deal with the teeny tiny text that maybe a university student might be able to deal with. So it's really important having that, both the perspective of internal Prodigy experts that have been teachers, but also going into classrooms. That's something that we do a lot of at Prodigy, and some of the just like light bulb moments that I've had, like I remember walking into a classroom a couple of months ago, and the special education teacher gave us a kind of talk before we walked in, and she said, I have 5 students in this school, and I can almost guarantee you in the right certain circumstance, they will throw a laptop. It may be that they're frustrated, or they've got an answer wrong, or they're just having a really bad day. So knowing that there's this environment where students are may be struggling or having a bad day or just severely overstimulated, and understanding that that's the reality in everyday classrooms, that it can be a little bit chaotic, and then thinking about how our products fit into that world, and how can they support teachers in maintaining the overwhelm and kind of energy levels in their classrooms.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like how unique this field of education, EdTech is. The problems that you're trying to solve is these are things that impact our future generation, and it's so meaningful. And not to say that other fields in tech aren't, but it's just I feel like it has to. The folks that are in EdTech are really, really passionate about this, and the work that we do really creates that meaning. So, and I remember we were also talking about in our previous conversation about, and I think we did talk about attention a little bit, but I think there's also a lot of students in this day and age that struggle with like cognitive disabilities and ADHD. What do you think are some kind of innovative ways that EdTech can kind of help solve those issues?
Yeah, I don't know if it's particularly innovative, but I think like number one is just the personalized learning. Every student is unique regardless of whether they have cognitive disabilities or not, and they have different needs that need to be addressed. And the reality is if you're one teacher and you've got 30 students, you can't do that every day, every minute of every day. So having EdTech to be able to step in and provide those personalized learning experiences, and also diversify the way that kids are learning content. So I may teach it in class one way, and then I may give them an on-paper activity to do, and then maybe I'll give them a piece of EdTech that also teaches that content. So delivering the content differently to students to maximize the ability for them to kind of absorb that content. And then the last piece I think is the most important, but just making sure your products are accessible and really truly accessible. And there's meeting AA WCAG standards, but then there's also thinking about things like cognitive disabilities, and so when we're looking at products like Prodigy for a student with ADHD, having the additional layer of being motivated to answer math questions that I may feel anxious about and I might not feel excited to answer, but like that little hit of dopamine when you get correct question right and you get to save a pet or whatever it is. It's a different way to learn and a different way to engage a kid's brain. And I think the more that we can do that and support tools that are accessible, I think that the more students are going to benefit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I remember when I was having a conversation with Patty, we talked a little bit about like the cell phone ban, and like there's certain legislations that basically kind of prevent students from using their phones in class, which can be a blocker, I think, for being able to access some of these tools. And I remember when I was teaching, I taught at several different schools, and every school has different, some schools have like a whole stack of Chromebook cards that every teacher can sign out, whereas there are certain schools that don't have funding, and so that's not really, you go to a computer lab with 20-year-old desktop computers, and that basically takes forever to boot up. So I don't know. I guess thinking about all of those things, how do we really bridge that gap between being able to bring these really awesome tools that can support students at all levels, and ensure that can be accessed at as many points as possible? I know this is a really big. question. There's no answers, but just throw it out there.
I could take a stab. I think I'll say two parts. For me, I hate the cell phone ban simply because, as I told you, I think it's not responsible for us to not educate kids how to manage their time with phones. As us adults, we're role models. And what do we see most of the time adults walking down the streets in offices? We're on our phones. So I always start with adults first. We have to role model. So if you're asking me, I think it's silly. I think that you always take the opportunity to educate kids when there's something like this. When it's about digital well-being, balancing your screen time, you take the opportunity to educate them, not ban them. At the same time, I also understand that each context of each school is vastly, vastly different. Educating kids on how to use their phone at an affluent community compared to a marginalized community, the stakes and the pedagogy you take are vastly different. So perhaps for a nationwide kind of aspect, this is the way to go, but I'm not in agreement with it. Speaking of EdTech, I think if we're talking about not using tech, not using phones in class, EdTech tools might have to lean a bit more towards offline uses, right? I think having EdTech tools where you can use it on a more offline basis, that might be something that is a bit more manageable for schools to use. So, you're asking someone who's not for it. So I think this is kind of the best I can give you is having tools and EdTech tools where you can use without internet access, because it looks like this is the way and this is the direction that we are going into. We can't teach these kids how to manage their time with their phones, so it's easier to pull the plug, and what do? So let's pull the plug, no internet, how do we manage that? So that's my not so optimistic spiel.
So I also don't like the cell phone ban, but for a different reason, because truthfully, nothing has changed. It's not like previous years I was letting my students use their phones and I wasn't saying anything. Nothing has changed in the sense that last year when there was no cell phone ban, I was still telling them to put their phones away, and this year with the cell phone ban, I'm still telling them to put their phones away. And number two, I do think EdTech I don't think the cell phone ban really affects the accessibility of it, because it's not a cell phone ban. The teacher has the right to the teacher can tell the student, take out your phone because we're going to be using it. But also, truthfully, I can't speak for all schools and I can't speak for all Ontario school boards, but at least I've been to 4 or 5 different schools. At least in every school I've been at, all students had a personalized Chromebook. So whether we didn't have phones or we did have phones, it doesn't really make a difference, because all students are expected to bring their personalized Chromebook or laptops to school for educational purposes.
Interesting. So it's not like you have to collect phones in the front, like a box or anything like that. It's not an actual ban.
No.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about, switch gears a little bit. This is a question for, I guess, either of you. I was wondering about maybe challenges and strategy, because we're always trying to, when I was a teacher, thinking about inclusion, diversity in the content that I bring to my students was very, very important. So as you're developing these like EdTech products, what are some challenges and strategies in kind of balancing inclusivity and diversity in the educational content that is within the product development itself, while navigating the different cultural, political landscapes for your the main? I think Prodigy is mostly used in the U.S., correct?
Yeah, mostly used in North America, yeah.
Yeah, all of our content is curriculum aligned, so we don't really get into those kind of choices where, maybe in one curriculum they don't teach this, and maybe other people would find that not inclusive. We don't really get into that too much. But I think where our opportunity is to kind of show inclusion and diversity is in our art. So we have lots of different characters. The students playing can customize their avatars to look the way they want them to, and there's a lot of different representations of all different types of people within that. And even in our marketing materials as well, we try to represent different types of families and just having like a wide range of characters that the students can identify with.
Not so much on the include. I think it covers it. We are like very focused on being curriculum aligned, and that is really important to teachers. Maybe in terms of like challenges that come from like that in a different perspective, is that because students at an early education age are learning across so many different subjects, and the learning that's being done is very tactile and visual. They kind of need to hold things in their hands and see things. When you're learning how to tell time, you need to have a clock that you can kind of manipulate. Or when you're learning about money and currency, you need to be able to have like counters and counting blocks. So one of the challenges that we're kind of currently working on improving our question interface. And so it's thinking about what kinds of manipulatives that we should include to cover as much curriculum as possible, because it's kind of infinite how many different things that you could have to ask different questions. So that's kind of where we're at. What do students need to be able to understand the content and answer the question effectively? Because it's so much farther beyond your typical like multiple choice question that you would get in college or in high school.
So I think we're going to have maybe one or two questions, and then we're going to take questions from the floor. And I know we've been through a lot of different topics, starting with AI, and honestly, we're just barely scraping the surface, because EdTech is such a complicated field, because we're working with real people here. And anyone feel free to answer this question, but whether based on our discussion today or just like things that we're thinking about, all in all, what do you think are some of the most critical challenges that we're facing in EdTech today? And what are some concrete steps, if you have any, of how we can tackle those challenges?
I think from a teacher perspective, I think lack of funding is a big challenge that I face in accessing EdTech. In 2020, I feel like we had a lot of funding and we had a lot of licensing for a lot of different EdTech platforms. And in 2024, that fund has been depleted, and we are really left struggling, and there is no money for any licensing and to purchase any products. And the free versions of a lot of products, they work great, but what more after that? Like, we are no longer able to access those.
Yeah, for me, I think there's two areas that I would see. I think one is definitely student engagement. I think in the time where attention spans are a matter of 15 seconds, and I always have the same with my staff, that for every age or every year a kid is, that's how many minutes you should talk for. If they're 15 years old, don't talk at them for 40 minutes. Talk for 15 minutes. They can't focus for that long. So, and we compound this with social media. Their attention span are so short. So I think student engagement really is a massive challenge that we in EdTech need to do our best in solving. The second one I would say is AI literacy. AI literacy, AI ethics. Kids, teachers, we're all using it. However, kids, and myself included, teachers sometimes are not educated on how LLM works or how AI works. There's no formal reasoning. It's based on prediction. This very highly sophisticated autocomplete. But when kids come and tell me, oh yeah, there's this amazing reasoning, they're giving me reasoning. So helping them understand how AI works, and that AIs are not just LLMs, it's much more beyond that. That's an important part. AI ethics, absolutely. How do we use AI ethically? What are we using it for? engaging them in these conversations, I think, are critical to the landscape of where education is, and especially where education will be in 5 to 10 years. So.
Well, I just have to say congratulations to the audience for staying engaged for a full walking ride.
There you go.
We're at least 50 years old in here. Congratulations. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think another challenge that we face in the industry is that for teachers, there's just so much overwhelm. There's so many different ed tech platforms and products available. So also just letting teachers know what is out there and what is easy to use and what they can implement right away, I think is definitely a big challenge for everyone in this space.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, so Prodigy recently did some research with T-shirts to understand why they were choosing certain ed tech products, and what we learned was following COVID, teachers just have less time because they're spending so much of their time trying to get students up to grade level and managing behavioral and social and emotional learning skills in the classroom. They have very little time to use things like Prodigy in their classroom. So they're much, much pickier about the products that they do pick up. So it's become more challenging, I think, as an ed tech tool to be selected by a teacher. And we also need to be thinking about how can we ease that burden and that challenge of just not having enough time in the day to support all of your students.
I did want to go to audience questions, but I know we left off on challenges, and I do want to leave off on kind of a more hopeful note. So I think maybe just like one really quick, I don't know, you can offer like a piece of advice for folks in this room who are interested in getting into EdTech, or maybe you can reflect on how we can ensure EdTech remains a tool that enhances human connection and learning rather than replacing it. So just I guess maybe one piece of advice, little note about what you believe in the future of education, EdTech, and the Crossroads, but then we'll go to audience questions.
I think for me, if you're interested in EdTech, go talk to teachers. There's nothing more valuable than going and talking to teachers and being in their classroom and seeing what that experience is like. So if you are interested in EdTech, that would be absolute number one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also think if you're really interested in ed tech, it'd be really good for you to familiarize yourself with what kind of ed tech is the most popular, what's really being used. If you have any children of your own or family friends, find out what they are using regularly, and that's kind of some areas that you can explore a little bit.
I don't know what advice I can offer because I'm not really in it. I just utilize the services. But I can say like a good thing that happened from using it. So when I used to teach at the virtual secondary school, and it was almost very beautiful seeing my students who've never met before all connecting together online and becoming friends with each other because they are spending the next 4 years virtually because that's the mode of education that they have chosen. So seeing them kind of establish friendships outside of the school has been really cool and really nice.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Alex said. It's if you're in tech or you want to get into EdTech or you're in EdTech, work with the users, not the buyers. I know that's harder because you have to sell. Because unfortunately, the buyers, principals, district, they don't use the product. It's the users who are the teachers who often provide the most useful feedback because they are the ones who are championing and using that product. So listen to the users, try to scrape by with the buyers.
Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for James? I think we're going to open it to the floor if anyone has any questions.
Hey everyone, my name is Lucas. Great to hear from you all. The conversation started off with AI helping with personalized learning, which I totally agree with. It makes sense. Everyone learns differently. And the conversation then shifted more towards distraction. There's a lot of talk around distraction, which obviously is a big problem. But, and I think personalized learning will help a lot with that. But I wonder if the distraction is rooted in students not understanding what Pythagorean theorem is going to help to make them money. So, where do you see AI playing a role in bridging the gap between education and the real world, and like making students understand why what they're learning is going to help them?
Yeah, so I mean, you hit on a great point in terms of trying to help students understand why they're learning what they're learning. You know, in education, you have to make learning meaningful. You have to make sure the content you're teaching is relevant to the kid. Unfortunately, we're humans here. We do not know the depth of what children are interested in. I work predominantly with teenagers. As much as I try my best to keep up with all their lingos and what they're interested in, it's impossible for me. But when I have tools like AI, it's very easy for me to create a lesson that I might focus on, you know, analysis. But the content might be a specific meme that's very prevalent in that time. I'm still teaching them the skills, only the content's different. In today's age, what's more important, content or skill? I think I can say skills is far more superior than simply knowledge these days. So I think utilizing AI where they have a depth of knowledge that we will never have, that will help us to create really tailored lesson plans that we can even say, hey, what's the most relevant thing to 12-year-olds right now in this month? Look at Google Trends, plug it in, create a lesson from it. That can make it meaningful. But not only that, you know, Alex talked a lot about personalized learning. Having this personalized learning is game changer. In education, we talk so much of differentiated learning. Before AI, teachers had to kind of make their adjustments to create materials for the lower, middle, and high teaching. But for teachers, we're mostly teaching to the middle and a lot to the low. The high is usually forgotten about. But when we have this, you know, with AI now, they're able to create very specific learning paths that's relevant to each of them. The other thing that I read a couple weeks ago that was fascinating was there were two, I think this was a university in Lithuania, and it was a law school. They had two law professors create a chatbot that were basically twins of themselves. And the chatbot was only trained on the research and data that they provided. So they had this mirror, you know, professor so-and-so who's a twin of them. And they're interacting with the professor in their own time while the professor is talking to the front. So I think the opportunities are there, and it's very promising. And I think this is where we have to educate teachers and everyone on AI literacy, how that works.
I think too, maybe to add to that, while I was at Top Hat, we did a little bit of an experiment with can we take the AI tutor that we created and actually try and use it to get students to engage with each other and have those kinds of discussions like you mentioned, like what am I going to be using the Pythagorean theorem for in real life? Because we know engagement's a really difficult thing to do and to manufacture, and asking a bunch of teenagers to go and ask each other questions in a comment section is usually going to end up in crickets. But the idea was, can we bring an AI chatbot in and then use that to kind of like stimulate the conversation a little bit and participate in the conversation. So a student could then ask in that chat, and this chat existed to the side of the content that they were learning, a question like the one you framed, like why is this important to me? And the AI could then answer and kind of give that feedback, but it's in a live discussion with other students. So then it kind of gets the benefit of the class starts chatting about how could you use this in real life, and maybe kind of pushing each other to think maybe beyond the limits of just the content that they were meant to learn. And that helps students learn a little bit more deeply, and that peer-to-peer learning is also really important in that learning process and internalizing things a little bit more. So thinking about like more natural ways that we can slip AI into the learning process and make it feel more like a conversation and less like an afterthought and maybe something kind of stuck on the side.
Hi there. Thank you so much again for the talk. My name is Thaddy. I'm pretty involved in AI. I'm very recent technically in terms of the whole kind of industry and the ideas behind it. And one of the things that I'm very kind of, I wouldn't say concerned, but kind of like a little exclamation mark comes out when you guys mentioned chatbots and AI in terms of chatting and communicating with the students, is that like this is sort of taking away from the teaching of like internet literacy, media literacy, and I think what we are looking at when we're talking about AI within education is sort of replacing one thing with another, and it kind of sets a dangerous precedent of like privatizing, in a sense, education by having these companies come in and sort of support these types of toolings for these schools. One thing I do also want to mention, and I'm hoping maybe you guys would have the answer from your experience, is that how would you look at like the evolving pedagogy that comes with the research of how these things impact the students? Like how agile is this industry that you're able to then switch from like a 180 degree from one product to another within these environments? Because we know that the education structure is fairly slow to move, and for reasons that are pretty clear in terms of things just take a while to update, books can't be changed year to year, a lot of things are sort of like discussed upon through panels, there's a lot of bureaucracy behind it, and there are like reasons for that as well. But when we bring in an external factor such as products that support education and EdTech, my kind of concern is that kind of risks taking the decision out of the hands of those boards and putting it into the tech world and the tech industry, so to speak. So I guess if you can answer to those concerns, but also kind of talk about a little bit of the agility of the industry and how that kind of works towards the changes that we'll see coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. Pedagogy is slow. It is so slow. Things were still buzzing around these days. It was around for 10, 15, 20 years. And the other thing to also remember about pedagogy is that teaching is very hard to measure and study in terms of what's effective. There's a myriad of influences. Did the child get enough sleep? Are their parents divorced? What was their morning like? What was the teacher like? What class was it? You know, it's not like where teaching isn't something where I can say, hey, by doing this, like a factory, streamlining it, you will maximize your output. It doesn't work like that. It's an area that's very, very hard to pinpoint in terms of what works. But to your point of kind of the dangers and whatnot, you're absolutely right. It is scary. And which is why I think it's so important, not just in education, but specifically in education, you have to keep humans and educators in the loop every step of the way. It's AI in general for me, in my opinion. You have to keep humans in the loop. If they're not in the loop, it's not going to look so great. The other thing is, I think it's the perspective of how we view AI in education. I know quite a lot of people might view it as, oh, they're going to start taking over the teacher's job. They're going to start taking over the social interaction. They're going to start taking over the lesson planning. Then we're just going to have robots in there teaching and whatnot. So I think the paradigm has to shift where we're looking at AI as it's an augmentation, not a replacement. We have to see AI as an augmentation to pedagogy, to enhancing the social interaction with students. So I think seeing it from the perspective, it's an augmentation, but also seeing that, hey, let's automate those things that aren't so important. Your attendance, your grading, but really focus on what's important. So I think keeping them in the loop, educators being in the loop, AI ethics, AI literacy, that's, I think, is really key every step of the way, And like I said earlier, unfortunately, the buyers are usually the one that are in the loop, and users are kind of forgotten about a lot of the times. So, we have to switch that paradigm. So, what Alex and Natalie mentioned, being in the classes so often, it's music to my ears. That's fantastic. So we really have to shift that paradigm. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
I know that was just 2 questions, I'm so sorry, but we do have to wrap up. But the panelists will still be around for the next little while, so if you have any direct questions, please launch yourself at them. Just kidding. So we are going to wrap up. Thank you so much for the discussion today. And do we have the bar for the end yet, or is that to be announced?
Birkin.
We're going to go to Birkin. What's the address? We're going to get close to Birkin, so, and we'll be, but yeah, we'll have access to this space for the next 45 minutes or so. So feel free to mingle if there's any extra pizza.